Hey, what's up? This is Geoff Blake. I had a couple people write in after I had posted a couple of my Dreamweaver video tutorials and a couple of my articles related to Dreamweaver and CSS. People are wondering what the difference is between class rules and redefined HTML tags here in Dreamweaver, of course involving CSS. So I thought what I would do is come up with another set of video tutorials. This is a two-part series. The first half, this half, is going to talk about class rules. The second part is going to talk about redefined HTML tags. So if you're having similar confusion, similar frustration, hopefully all will be well after this. So I have myself a very plain, boring looking page here in Dreamweaver. I have some dates, I have some paragraphs, I have some graphics. It's all pretty straightforward. As a matter of fact, in terms of the formatting, it looks like hell. But I'm going to use some CSS to dress this guy up. So I'm going to start off, as I say, with class rules. Now, a couple of things. I'm going to start off by making a selection inside one of my paragraphs. Say something like this. And down on the property inspector, I have a style menu, but right now there isn't anything in there. So what I'm going to do is actually create my own style directly on the property inspector. It's really, really easy stuff. So I have my font menu here. I'll choose a font. I'll set my size. And I'll also set a quick color. Now, a couple of interesting things happen. First of all, on the Style menu, I now have a new style called Style 1. So in other words, as soon as I start messing around with the formatting options on the Property Inspector, Dreamweaver creates a class rule for me right off the bat. Here's something else. Have a look over inside the CSS Styles panel. And sure enough, there is my Style 1. I'll go ahead and highlight them. Now, one thing you need to know about class rules in CSS and in Dreamweaver is the name is always preceded by a period. That's how you know that it's a class rule, okay? And you'll also notice in the bottom half of the CSS Styles panel, there's all the settings for my Style 1. There's the color I set, the font, and the font size. If you're not seeing this in the bottom half of the CSS Styles panel, down at the bottom of the panel, click on the, I call it the two falling snowflakes button. Click on this guy right here. Slightly off topic, but the cool thing about this bottom area is I can make changes to my styles right on the fly down here. See my rule update back on my page? Or, of course, what I could do is just double click on these guys, and that'll open up the CSS Rule Definition dialog box for that specific rule. Now, I'm not going to get into all the settings inside this dialog box. That's a whole other topic. But just know that when you're messing around with your property inspector, messing around with those formatting options on the property inspector, I should say, Dreamweaver automatically creates for you a custom class rule. Now, I got to be honest, this is not how I create my class rules for a number of reasons. First of all, on the property inspector, I'm limited to what I can do. Font, size, color, bold, italics, a few other small things. Not really a whole lot. You saw back in the CSS Rule Definition dialog box when I double click on my rule, there's tons of stuff in here. I'll show you in just a minute or two how I go about creating my rules. But I've got something else to show you first. And that is how to apply your class rules. So check this out. Before starting all this, I had made a selection inside my paragraph, remember? So here's what happens when you make a selection. I'm going to go down and make another selection inside another paragraph, the word zoomable, for example. And then down on the property inspector, I'm going to pop open that style menu. There's my rule that Dreamweaver created for me, Style 1. I'll just choose it there. So to apply your styles, you're going to use this style menu here. So there's one way to apply your styles, by making a selection, a specific word or sentence, and using the style menu down on the property inspector. The second way to apply your styles is just by single clicking inside a paragraph. So this paragraph right here, I'm just going to single click inside it. And from the style menu on the property inspector, same thing. However, major difference. This time the whole paragraph gets formatted. In other words, Style 1, my class rule, gets attached to the entire paragraph. Now, to really understand this, I should show you what's going on in code view. I'll start off with my previous example of the word zoomable. So I'm going to highlight this guy, and then I'm going to go into my code view here. I hope you're all right with code. Inside my code view, where I had the word zoomable, I'll highlight this for you. Hopefully you'll be able to see this here, or maybe better yet, do this on your own. What happens when I make a selection is inside the code I get what's called a span element, and inside the span I have an attribute called class equals, and then the name of my style, style1. So I have a span, a class attribute, which is set to style1 in this case, the word zoomable, and then the span ends. So in other words, this little style1 here, the value for my attribute, is a reference to the class rule that we had just created not too long ago. As a matter of fact, up towards the top of my screen, I can see him right there in pink, dot style1, and then inside these squiggly brackets, there's all my settings. So you select a word inside a paragraph or a sentence or whatever, span is going to be used. So whenever you want to format a specific word or a specific sentence or something like that, make sure you make a selection. Now, do you remember the paragraph where I had single-clicked? He's right down here. I'll highlight this here for you. So there's P, that's my paragraph, which has a class attribute set to style1. So in other words, the class attribute is actually a part of the paragraph itself. So the entire paragraph block gets formatted, if that makes sense. In other words, my style1, my class rule, gets attached to the entire paragraph. That's why, back in design view, the whole thing went. So does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Just be really careful when you're using your class rules. Pay attention to what kind of selection you're making. Otherwise, you might get some unexpected results. Now, I'm just going to remove the formatting from this paragraph. So back down on the Style menu, I'll choose None. That clears off the formatting. One other quick thing, a lot of times people get confused between the Format menu and the Style menu on the Property Inspector. The difference is my Format menu, these are all HTML block elements, and the Style menu only contains class rules that I've created. In other words, the Format menu contains things that are actually built into HTML, and the Style menu contains things that I've created. Alright, so I said that I would show you how I go about creating my rules. Well, before I get to that, I want to make one other point, hopefully this makes sense, that with class rules, I can apply a class rule to any HTML element. If you know a little bit about your HTML, you have your elements and you have your attributes. Do a little bit of reading on this if you're not sure what I'm talking about. It's really easy stuff, by the way. So a class rule I can apply to any HTML element. For example, my paragraph that we just had not too long ago. However, as you've been seeing here, I have to apply my rules manually, one at a time. In other words, I had to select zoomable. I had to select 10 ton. I had to single click inside this paragraph down here. I have to tell my page where I want to use my class rules. Make sense? Okay, good stuff. Now, how do I go about creating my class rules? I don't bother using the Property Inspector for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't want a list of rules called Style 1, Style 2, Style 3, and so on and so on. I could rename them, but that's kind of tedious. Number two, the Property Inspector doesn't really give me a whole lot of options. We talked about that earlier. So here's what I do instead. Right down at the bottom of the CSS Styles panel, I have my new CSS Rule button. Go ahead and click on him. And I get this guy here. You may have done this before. I have no idea. But anyway, this is how I usually go about doing it. So my selector type right at the top is set to class. Very lovely. Inside my name field, I'm going to type in product. I'm going to define this rule inside an internal style sheet. That's a whole other video series. And I'll click on OK. Okay, great. So I wind up here. Hopefully this wasn't a surprise. So I'll go about setting my formatting here. Nothing too terribly exciting.